When I was pretty young, I was always an avid reader. My parents read to me before I went to bed, and I was always an avid reader on my own. And then about 1968, 67, my uncle gave me two magic books, Bruce Elliott's Classic Secrets of Magic and Walter Gibson's Secrets of Magic, Ancient and Modern. Um, and I read those books and memorized those books. I still have those books. And I would say that my love of magic books started with those two books. I assume, well, the Walter Gibson book is probably less known. I assume there's a German translation of Bruce Elliott's Classic Secrets of Magic available. It's certainly a worthwhile book, covers all areas of magic, very good routines. Uh, it's really a gold mine. When I was about 14 years old, I was up in Tannen's magic shop, and I asked Tony Spina, the demonstrator and part owner, for the hardest book they had, the hardest card book they had. And he sold me Cliff Green's Professional Card Magic. Now, this book was printed in 1961, and it sold pretty poorly because when I bought a copy in 1972, it was still the first printing. And it was a real challenge. And I started mastering the material and developing my own material, my own versions. I was also doing billiard ball magic, a lot of billiard ball magic, inspired by Jeffrey Buckingham's book, It's Easier Than You Think. In fact, I did the entire 13 ball routine with sewed together a fake cummerbund as a kid. I mean, it was ridiculous, but I learned the whole routine. I did it, performed it for my mother. Anyway, I developed my own billiard ball routines and stuff. I wanted to publish a book of my material, but I wanted Tannen's to do it. And I approached Irv Tannen about it, and he said, do it yourself. You'll make more money. And so I didn't want to start with a big card book. Now, mind you, I'm about 15 or 16 at this time. So the first book I wrote and illustrated and published was the interlock production of coins. You know, there was no way to do research via internet back then. So I ended up reinventing something that had already been published by Bill Simon in his little booklet, Controlled Miracles, in 1953, which was a way of concealing a coin when doing this. But I had many different versions and producing many coins, because you could fit a lot of coins in this area. And then I still didn't feel I was ready to publish a big book. So I then wrote up my different billiard ball routines and published that as Balls, Lessons in Sidearm Snookery. And then I felt I was ready to do a big card book. So, but all of these, the earlier books, the interlock production of coins and the billiard ball book, I would print in small quantities of 300 at a time, and Tannen's would buy, Irv Tannen would buy the whole printing, thus enabling me to pay the printer instantly. And then when he ran out, I would print more. But that's a long time ago. 1977, I believe. I was 76, I was 18. Yeah, 19 years old. But this is all material I had developed much earlier, and I had to teach myself how to draw, which took quite a few years. I would do all the illustrations and throw them out, and then redo them again with a different pen and throw them out. Gene Mays built me a light table, which is something animators use. And I would have my friend take photographs, put those down on the light table. And I mean, it was a learning process. I until I eventually found something I thought looked decent, not great, but decent. There are many different ways to begin. Sometimes a person will approach me saying, I would like to have a book done. I mean, nobody did that when I was starting. Um, my first large book was Card Magic, which came out in 1979. And the basis for it was a lot of my own material, this Cliff Green type material that I had been inventing. But I had access, living in New York City, to a lot of really clever, well-known magicians who would hang around at Tannen's on Saturdays and then go to the Governor cafeteria. So I had access to a lot of people I could ask for material. Plus, because I lived in New York, people frequently came through New York, and I like John Rockerbaumer or who lived elsewhere, and I could meet them and get to know them. Exactly why I decided to publish this large compendium of card magic, most of it created by other people, I have no idea at this point. I'm 62 now. I can't remember if I tied my shoes this morning. So in that case, the idea was self-generated, sort of. Then I did a smaller book after that called Card Works. I wanted to do something different, something that involved collaborations between people and correspondence, and it was kind of a failure. It's never been reprinted. The next big book I did after that was Coin Magic. I thought, I'm here, I am, David Roth's here, Jeff Latta's here, Saul Stone's here, all these people are creating coin magic around here. And there were no other big books on coin magic except for Bobo's many years earlier. So again, this was a self-generated idea. And I did that, and that was a big selling book. It was like, and it was a beautiful book. Then I did Complete Works of Derek Dingle. Now, this was a book that Derek was going to do with Carl Fulvus, so it would have been some soft cover thing with the comb binding. But Fulvus wasn't offering Derek any money. So I offered Derek, I paid him. So he did the book with me. And between Coin Magic and the Derek Dingle book, that was the real beginning of my publishing career. Everybody bought those books. Everybody liked the way they looked. They liked my drawings. My drawings are not great. They're okay. The movement lines, they give the illusion of making learning simpler, but I don't think they really make learning simpler. The next book was David Roth's Expert Coin Magic, which took me a long time, 3 years to write and illustrate. And that just sort of, that was my idea. I had to talk David into it. He wanted to quit several times when we were at various points. And I said, I've already done so much, I'm not quitting. You will continue to the end. And then after that, I started publishing books other people had written, which I believe the first was 1985, Eugene Berger's Spirit Theater, which was a book that had been sitting with several different publishers over the years, and nobody had actually gotten it out. So I said to Eugene, whom I met at some convention, I said, well, I'd like to do it, because I realized if I was going to earn a living doing this, I couldn't publish one book every 2 or 3 years. I had to start publishing many books each year, which means publishing books other people had written, which I would illustrate, or reprinting old magazines in book form in a limited number, like 300 or something. Those were expensive, so I could make a decent amount of money on them with very little work. And nobody else was doing that at the time. So sometimes the ideas are self-generated. Sometimes somebody approaches me, like Jay Sankey sent me a video out of the blue when he was 16 years old. wanted to put some tricks in Richard's almanac. I think what he really wanted was a book, which we eventually got to, 2 books. And once it's known that you're doing books of other people's material, more people come to you. And even people who have written their book and are looking for a way to get it published will come to you. By the early 90s, because of just sort of a general failure of education and teaching in the United States and teaching people to read, and the rise of videotapes, VHS cassettes, book sales were starting to decrease. Also, I mean, I was publishing sometimes as many as 8 books a year. It was just flooding the market. And then there were other people saw what I was doing, like Louis Falanga, and he didn't know what he was doing, but he knew I could do it. And once desktop publishing became available, he figured out he could do it too. So, okay, so then I had competitors. Anyway, so by the 90s, things were slowing down. And then Genie came along, and I was able to find some partners. And with my money and their money, we financed the purchase of the magazine. And essentially, for a long time, the last book I published was in 1998, René Lavon's Mysteries of My Life, which he and I co-wrote. And then I didn't do any books for over a decade while I concentrated on Genie. But then I got itchy to do books again because I really like writing books. I really like writing books. And so slowly I did a few. I think The Burglass Effects was the first big book I had published. It must be 10 years after starting Genie. That was a big project. I spent 100 hours with David Burglass, and I know how much time I spent because I videotaped all of it. And bit by bit, I've been able to do more books. The market has changed greatly. I sold a lot of copies of my earlier books. Books now, you're lucky if you can sell over 1,000 copies, which barely pays for itself. So I tend to do very large books now, like Tenyoism, the Theodore DeLand book, Mr. Jennings Takes It Easy, the book that just came out, and the book I'm now working on for the next 2 years, which is the new expanded edition of Greater Magic. It appeals to me to take on projects that no one else will do. In the case of the Jennings books, he entrusted me with his material. He knew he wasn't going to live to see the books, but I consider it a kind of sacred duty to finish those books. It took a long time. I have a very bad back. I have problems with my back. So whereas earlier I would either pose for the photographs or take the photographs or do the drawings, I can no longer do any of those things. I can't bend over for more than a minute or two without being in immense pain. So with the Jennings book, Mr. Jennings Takes It Easy, I had no way to complete the book. I couldn't pose for the drawings. I couldn't pose for the photos. I couldn't take the photos. And eventually, Julie Eng and Jason England volunteered Julie to take the photos, Jason to pose for the photos. And it's a huge job because you got to learn everything in the book. Now I'm there when the photos are being taken and I'm reading and he's reading and, but it takes over a week, all day, every day. And it's a big book. And the next book, Mr. Jennings Takes It Tough, with all the difficult material, I wrote 500 pages during the pandemic from March through November. So I've already got a big head start. I have not written the coin tricks yet. I have not written all of Jennings' explorations of Hostens's material yet. And I haven't written material that involves shuffling work on the table. But generally, I've done pretty much everything else. And the finished book will be larger than Mr. Jennings Takes It Easy, which is 600 pages. So, but I can't think about the next Jennings book until I send Greater Magic off to the printer. I'm doubling the size. So instead of one 1,000 page volume, there will be two 1,000 page volumes. And the contents of the original book will be spread across both books with new material inserted at appropriate places all along. I have 24 people who are experts in various areas of magic writing new chapters. I'm writing new chapters. Excuse me, it's just an immense project. No one else is crazy enough to do it. Just like the Jennings books, just like the Tenyo books, 2 700-page books, just like the Deland book. I mean, all these books are things, you know, I can't just work on one book generally. I get bored, so I hop around. So I've got multiple things going on. But that won't be the case with Greater Magic for the next 2 years. So I started on the Deland book in 1996. I started with Jennings in 1983. I think I published Tenyoism in 2015, which means I started, because in some cases, like with Tenyoism, you have to start collecting, right? You have to have everything, because there is no one else who has everything. And I can't travel to 20 different people's houses to shoot photographs. It's just not feasible. I got to have the stuff to do it. So that means years of collecting. And then with Tenyoism, 6 trips to Japan over the course of 2 years to interview the original members of the creative division, to gather the material for the new variations. These things are very involved, and I enjoy that. I have no desire to do an easy book. I've done all that stuff already. In profusion, I've done it. I've done it up to here. So I really like challenging books now. I will have a book coming out this summer on the magic of Jean-Pierre Vallerino. And that's a book that I hired somebody to write. And but it's a book Jean-Pierre is a very old friend of mine. And I don't like to turn down old friends. I say this, you know, fortunately, most of my old friends are deceased, so they're not going to ask me for favors. When I started doing magic books, photos were very expensive to include. You had to pay $10 per photo to have the photos half-toned. So if you wanted to put 1,000 photos in a book, that's $10,000. It's just not even possible. That was the reason I started drawing hands. The only way to do these books with 1,000 drawings, of which I've done many, the only way to publish the book with that many images is to do drawings. You couldn't afford to do with photographs. And some people definitely prefer drawings. I mean, my drawings were not static. A lot of them had movement, and you could see through things, and there were X-ray images, ghost images, multiple hands. I was inspired by Barry Ross, who illustrated the Bill Tarr books, to have this sort of whoosh and multiple images overlapping. Some people prefer photos in books. And there came a time after I had drawn about 10,000 hands that I was just tired of sitting there in the dark. You know, my back hurt, my hand hurt. So I started mixing photos and drawings in my books, like Sawa's Library of Magic, Volume 1. And Ron Wilson's book, The Uncanny Scott. I would mix photos. I would take photos, and then some photos needed to be turned into illustrations, because you had to show things, X-ray views or something that were better done in a drawing. Now you don't have to do that, of course, because with Photoshop, I discovered, I don't even know, well over a decade ago in Genie, that you can drop out the upper hand, reduce the opacity, place it over the photo of the lower hand, and you could see through it. And I could achieve, and then you can add whoosh lines, and you can add arrows, and you can achieve many of the things by using Photoshop that I was able to do with illustrations. Anyway, because I got tired of drawing, I started mixing photos and drawings. And I would say those were experiments. I wasn't really happy doing that, but I had to do it if I wanted to keep earning a living. Then I had known Tono Onosaka for many years. I refer to him as my Japanese father. He's 88, the same age as my real father. And I had learned so much about Tono. He's a wonderful artist that I asked him if he would illustrate some books for me, and he did. So he illustrated books for me. And then I met Earl Oakes, and he illustrated many, many books for me. I mean, his drawings were so beautiful, modeled lines and a real sense of dimensionality, beautiful. And also both of those fellows worked the same way I did. I took photos, because the point of view of the photo that's being used for the drawing is very important. And I was very good at picking the right point of view. So I would take the photos, send the photos to them. They would trace the photos just like I did, in a much more artistic way than I did. So then I didn't have to mix photos and drawings anymore. I went back to doing books full of illustrations. When it was not possible to take photos, such as Martin Gardner Presents, or the J.K. Hartman books, or trying to think, I know there are more. The Magic of Edward Victor's Hands, where it was not possible to take photos, I would just send everything to Joe Schmidt, and he was able to draw everything with no photo references, just from the text. It was quite remarkable. But Earl died. Tone Onosaka got carpal tunnel syndrome, and Joe Schmidt died. So I'm back to where I started from. Now, one thing I learned with Genie was that if you use color photos, now Earl illustrated tricks in Genie for a long time, but during the same period, I discovered that people can learn much more easily from a color photo than a black and white photo. There's just so much more information. The photos are less artistic, but they convey more information in a simpler way. And the photos can also be smaller. Black and white photos and drawings need to be larger, in my opinion. So then came the idea of, well, let's see, because Earl Oakes illustrated the Burglass book, Burglass Effects. And then my friend Freddie Lieberman took the photos for David Kay's book, Seriously Silly, which is a brilliant book. And then one of the things that had held me up with the DeLand book for so many years, and also with proceeding with the Tenyo book, was that I really felt they needed to be printed in color. They absolutely needed to be printed in color. My goal for the DeLand book was to make it look as if the cards were laying on a piece of white paper as opposed to a photograph. And I had seen books like that published in the real world. They're all in color. So when I became aware that there was a color printer I could use in China and it was financially feasible, though expensive. I mean, Tenyoism was $100,000 job. between the printing, the travel, and everything. I mean, it was expensive, but it was feasible to print the books in full color. And so I used tenuism as a test to see if it would work so I could do the land book. And then the land book, I saw it work beautifully. So then I did the book on Theodore Deland. And both of those sold very well, even in the limited market that now exists. And then the next big book was the Jennings book, but I decided to do those in black and white, sort of just as a test to see if I could get beautiful black and white photos out of the Chinese publishing printing company that were better than I can get from an American printing company that I could afford. There are better printers in the United States, but I'm using short run textbook printers, and the photos are sort of, they have a gray quality to them. And if you see Mr. Jennings Takes It Easy and you see the black and white photos, they're stunning. The backgrounds are inky black, the hands are beautifully toned and they pop. So I now know that I can get beautiful black and white photography from my Chinese printer. The Valerino book will have color photographs in it because there are so many photographs that we have to produce those at a smaller size in order to keep the book at an affordable retail price. So it will have color photos. But Mr. Jennings Takes It Tough will have black and white photos because I want it to be a sister book to Mr. Jennings Takes It Easy. They will look very much alike in their styles, because the content will be different. Greater Magic, of course, will have line drawings because Greater Magic, the existing book, has line drawings. And I think at the moment, in order to keep that feeling of Greater Magic, I have to use drawings in the book. And of course, it will be printed in black and white. I would say, you know, I have to learn everything in order to write it. So in every book of mine that I've written, you can be assured that I was able to do every trick in there. I have to, in order to understand gravity, pressure, moisture, where to squeeze. You just have to be able to do all these things. And so, I mean, very few people would know this at this point, but I did a lot of coin magic when I was young. And in order to do the book Coin Magic, I had to learn all that coin magic. I had to be able to do it. And in order to do David Roth's book, I had to learn all that material too. But my first love is really card magic. And right after I finished the Roth book, I sort of fell away from coin magic. I can still do some things I learned from Saul Stone when I was 14, 15, and 16, such as his one-hand color changing coin and stuff. You know, that stuff is burned into my muscle memory. On my deathbed, it'll be one of the few things I'll still be able to do. I would definitely say one of my favorite books is The Complete Works of Derek Dingle, because I'm a card magic guy, and it's just filled with the most amazing card magic. Some people consider it dated, but I can guarantee you I can do any routine in that book and fool everybody, magicians and laymen. It's just you know, I mean, there are shortcomings. There are mistakes in the writing because I had no proofreaders then. The text is a little too small. The drawings are a little crunched. You know, I would fix the book if I could. But even with those problems, it's still, of the books I've done, one of my favorites. The Burglass Effects is also absolutely one of my favorites. I had the most delightful time with David Berglass doing that material. Now, I've never done anything like that. I love sleight of hand, and there's no sleight of hand in that book. All the think a card tricks where you hold up the fan and ask a person to think of one, I can do all that stuff. I can't do any card at any number. I can't do the Berglass effect because I can't remember. I have a terrible memory, so I can't do anything with a memorized deck. Thus, for the chapter in Greater Magic, the upcoming version on the memorized deck, Jamie Ian Swiss is writing that because I know nothing about memorized deck routines because I can't even remember a 5-card stack. But there are certainly a lot of things I got out of the Berglass book that make it one of my favorites. And it was one of my favorites to do. You know, books that are among my favorites might be favorites because not because of the material in it, but just because of the pleasure I had in doing the books. You know, also The Secrets of Brother John Hammond is certainly one of my favorites. You know, I got to know all these people. Dingle was a mentor of mine. I met him when I was 14. Even when I was a kid, I was trying to learn the pass. I said, "Oh, can I look underneath?" He said, "Sure." I would lay on the ground and watch from underneath. He was very generous that way, you know, in sharing. I've always tried to carry that forward. So I developed close friendships with Derek and with Brother Hammond and with Larry Jennings. Other people I'm sort of friendly with briefly when I'm working on a book, like Ron Wilson, but I never got close to him. You know, I spent time with him doing the book, and then I would see him occasionally and say hello. You know, every book is different. I really like the Dingle book, the Hammond book, Jennings 67. And the new book, Jennings Takes It Easy, it was a great labor. So I will like it more the further I get away from having finished it. But I believe that the book I will like the most next to the Dingle book and the Hammond book and A Collected Almanac is also one of my favorite books. You know, people say, how did you get so much good material for Richard's Almanac? And there was a question of being the right guy in the right place at the right time. I knew a lot of people who had material they were willing to have published. I had published some acclaimed books, so they knew I could write it up and illustrate it without screwing it up. But I think a book that will certainly join the other favorites I have will be Mr. Jennings Takes It Tough when it comes out. It's just a wonderful book, so much good material and difficult as hell. Every trick has a pass or a palm or a cull or a half pass. And many tricks have multiples of those sleights in them because that's just the way Jennings worked. And it's amazing he could come up with so much material that didn't use those sleights, which is what's in Takes It Easy. Because in Takes It Easy, there are no tricks with passes, palms, culls, reverses of half pass types, no top changes in Takes It Easy. And yet Takes It Tough is full of all of that kind of stuff. And for that very reason, it will be one of my favorites.
And did you try the material from Jennings Takes It Tough?
Well, I've had to work as I've written Jennings Takes It Tough. I had to really practice a lot because I hadn't practiced in quite a while, and I had to learn every single thing, every pass, every palm. I have to work through every trick, every cull. You know, in order to learn the subtleties of the handling as Jennings teaches them to me, I have to physically do them. So I had videotaped about 18 hours of Larry myself before he died, and he had sent me about 90 audio cassettes of material, just describing them verbally. because he liked to sit up late at night and describe material and record material onto his audio cassette player. So he left me an enormous amount of stuff. By the time I'm done, every good item will have been published. He didn't want me to publish everything simply because he felt some of it was not up to par. I try to publish things that have some value for in one reason or another, even if the trick is not perfect. There's a great idea in the trick that somebody will take and make a better trick from. When I was a young magician, things were very different. People there were robust IBM and SAM meetings with younger members. I was in New York. All the magicians used to get together. This happened in Chicago and Los Angeles, usually in cities where there was a person who was a catalyst and people gathered around. I mean, in New York, we had many catalysts. We had Dingle, Harry Lorraine, Slidini, Ken Krenzel, Frank Garcia. And the catalyst before them was Vernon. He was the overlap, right, that carried forward. And then in California, it was Vernon, where Vernon moved to California, and he was the catalyst. And all sorts of people moved out to Los Angeles to be around the professor and learn from him. In Chicago, people moved there to be around Ed Marlowe and learn from him. Also, there were a lot of great Chicago bar magicians. And there were similar situations in different cities. These things don't exist anymore. Most magic club meetings, you know, they're now in somebody's living room because they've got 4, 5, or 6 members. And many cities have no get-togethers. The situations in the major cities have collapsed as the catalysts have died. And if the students don't decide to keep it going, then it just sort of withers away. And that's what's happened. So my advice for young magicians would be to read books. Find people whose magic you think is interesting, and then go to them or interact with them privately via Zoom or Skype or something. But you really have to be there with people, so you learn so much when you're there in person with people that you don't get over the internet. My advice would be to stop watching crap videos on YouTube. They suck. They teach you bad magic, not good magic. Any moron can put a video on YouTube. And most of the videos on YouTube are put up by morons. Don't be a moron. Learn from books. And if you want to learn from DVDs or downloads, you can learn the sleights and copy the sleights from those things, but don't copy the presentations of those people. Don't copy the way they present things, because you know it doesn't suit you. You've got to figure out what suits you. When you're learning and you're among a group of magicians like I was, or in these other groups, you learn pretty quick what works and what doesn't from your peers. You say, can I show you this? And they say, that's really terrible, or your patter is, you're being an asshole, stop it. Those kinds of things. So young magicians are at a disadvantage today. They have access to a lot more information, but they have far fewer ways to take that information and turn it into something valuable to them. So my advice is to read books, and my advice is to practice every day and practice things that are valuable. Don't practice crap, and try to make sure you're practicing things properly before you invest a lot of time, because it's very difficult to unlearn things that you've learned incorrectly.